Lions Vikings 23-10 with 6 turnovers by the Detroit Lions. Five of them from Jared Goff. This was one of the crazier outcomes that you would imagine. The Vikings had 51 passing yards, and they lost 48 yards on 7 sacks. 3 net passing yards. According to the Associated Press, there have only been 5 times in the Super Bowl era that someone has won by 10 or more points and had fewer than 10 passing yards. And it hadn't happened since 1978. And think about how the rules have changed to make it more conducive to passing. You know, some of those games, there was one in 69, 73, 74, whatever. Maybe the goal was to just run the ball in the 60s or 70s. Now it's a passing game. It's pass first, especially the Vikings offense. Of all the teams in the NFL, you would get pretty far down on the list before you guess the Vikings. Now, if you know that Max Brosmer is going to be the quarterback, you're more likely to guess them. But that was as bad as it could have been from an offensive performance for the Vikings. They had 76 yards of total offense until Jordan Addison got a reverse and went 65 yards to the house and really provided the dagger. The game was undecided until that play. That put the Vikings up, I think, 10. They added another 3. I think that's how it went. It made it 20-10. They added 3 points, and the Lions just couldn't do anything. But the performance from the offense, I said in the days before the game, it's a given they miss Ben Johnson. And I think the Dan Campbell attitude of, hey, whoever's going to go is going to go. I want guys who want to be here. And I think that's a good way to do business generally. But they had too much of a brain drain from the coaching staff. And they missed Ben Johnson. And the fact that Dan Campbell had to take over play calling in the Washington game, remember at first it was a secret. He had the cheaters on, and he's studying the play sheet. He's calling the plays, and he continued to call the plays. And yeah, it works against a team with a so-so defense. It doesn't work against a team with a great defense. And the Vikings, who swept the Lions this year, they provided the blueprint for handling the Lions offense without Ben Johnson. Pressure up the middle, force Jared Goff to move. Jared Goff is not one of the quarterbacks, and there aren't many who have this skill set that can make something happen when the play that's called goes sideways. 6 turnovers total and 5 from Goff. They were relentless yesterday. It was incredible. And it just makes me wonder what kind of changes are going to be necessary for the Detroit Lions. I said if they lose this one with their playoff lives on the line, it goes far deeper than not having Ben Johnson. There's something fundamentally wrong with the organization right now. To go from 15-2 to 8-8, something is off. And I don't know that one off season can fix it. You know, the window opens quickly and it closes quickly. I keep going back to Dan Campbell's quotes from after the loss to the 49ers in the 2023 NFC Championship. They blew the 17-point lead, went for it on 4th down when they shouldn't have. The field goal would have put them back up by 17. They went for it. They didn't get it. They're up 14. That was a B12 shot for the 49ers. If you saw the receiver series on Netflix, it was clear. It was clear. One scene, Amon-Ra St. Brown's family in the stands basically saying, what the hell are they doing going for it there? And the next scene, Deebo Samuel on the 49ers sideline, because both players were among the subjects of the receiver series. You could see how it lifted the 49ers to get that opportunity to wipe out that 14-point deficit and win the game. And they did. And Campbell said to reporters, I just told the guys this may have been our only shot. And that was jarring when he said it. And he tried to walk it back the next day. But he was right. It was their only shot. If they get back to the brink of the Super Bowl next year, it will be with a drastically different roster than what they had in 2023. And do you look at the Lions now and think they're closer or farther away from finishing the job that they started in 23, tried to continue in 24 until their divisional round upset loss at home to the Commanders? I just feel like they have a long way to go. And I want to choose my words carefully here, but because I'm not trying to make this into a story, but I'm also I'm also trying to give you an honest assessment of what I saw yesterday when I wasn't sleeping. I was reminded of the Jared Goff that the Rams gave up an extra first-round pick to get rid of. It was Jared Goff for Matthew Stafford, with the Rams giving the Lions 2 first-round picks and a third-round pick. And when that trade went down 5 years ago next month, a GM with another team said, look, here's what happened. It was a 1 and a 3 for Stafford, and the Rams threw in another first-round pick to get the Goff contract off the books. That Jared Goff, the one that Sean McVay wanted to move on from, that guy still rears his head from time to time. 5 turnovers yesterday. The way his contract's structured, it's not going to be a question this offseason, but I think what's going to happen for 26, we got to see more of the Jared Goff whose name was chanted zealously and loudly by Lions fans, even on the road. We got to see more of that guy. If we see too much of the guy that we saw yesterday, 27, I don't think Jared Goff's going to be the quarterback of the Lions. Not 26, it's fine. 2027, if we see the guy we saw yesterday on a regular basis, I mean, that's not even controversial. That's not a hot take. If the guy who coughed up the ball 5 times makes regular appearances in 2026, there's no way in hell he's going to be the quarterback of the team in 27. Hell, if that guy shows up regularly and isn't benched next year, Dan Campbell may not be the coach in 2027. I'm not trying to start anything there either. But 8-8 after 15-2. It's better to have low expectations that you exceed than high expectations that you fail to meet. And the bar was high for the Lions. And man, they had their shot. This may have been our only shot. Dan Campbell may have been absolutely right. The Vikings trying to build something, trying to have some carryover. In past years, it meant more because the teams didn't change as much as they do now. This roster is going to be very different in 2026. How much of 4 straight wins, when they were left for dead, when it was as low tide as it's ever been for the Vikings, blowout losses to the Chargers, shut out by the Seahawks. It was an ugly, nasty mess. And then one game at a time, immediately after the 26-0 loss, I believe. Some of that is just kind of wiped out of my brain by choice, but they started winning, and they won one after another, beat the Commanders, beat the Cowboys, beat the Giants. Now they beat the Lions in a game the Lions had to have. I think there's an enthusiasm, a reinvigoration in the franchise. And I think and I said this before, whoever it was that decided they didn't need to have a veteran presence at quarterback to be the presumed starter this year, or at a minimum compete with J.J. McCarthy, whoever made that decision needs to have some kind of accountability, whatever it may be. Not necessarily fired, but when someone makes a really bad decision, you make a really bad decision by continuing to listen to that person in the future. And I don't know who made the decision. I don't know. But I know from dealing with people who were dealing with the Vikings in March, there was a sense of confusion as to who's making these decisions. And this is one of the realities of having ownership that isn't in the building every day. And the guy that they replaced Kevin Warren with, because remember, Kevin Warren was basically the surrogate owner. He was the guy who was there every day before he became the Big Ten commissioner. Now he's the president and CEO of the Bears. But the guy who replaced him, I have to look up who it is. This guy keeps such a low profile. I don't know how involved he is in any of this stuff. And I think the Wilfs stay involved remotely, but they're not there all the time. I'd love to know, within that power structure, within that organization, between GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, Coach Kevin O'Connell, Rob Brzezinski, who's still floating around negotiating contracts, how did this play out? Where we got a team that went 14-3, Super Bowl ready potentially. We got a question at the most important position on the field. What are we doing with Sam Darnold? What are we doing with Daniel Jones? Oh, Aaron Rodgers wants to play here. We're going to say no. And we're going to put out the unproven guy who missed all of his rookie season because he got a knee injury in the only preseason game he played. Let's go. Let's do this. I suspect that there were conflicting voices. That's all I'm saying. And I think part of the obligation of ownership this offseason is to is to recreate that moment and figure out who was right and figure out who was wrong. And as we go forward and try to figure out what we're going to do, hey, maybe the person who ended up being right, person or persons, who ended up being right about the quarterback situation should have a little more say going forward. And maybe the person or persons who were wrong about it. I'm not saying they get fired. I'm just saying, you always got to decide who you're going to listen to in an organization. Whoever was saying we need to have Darnold or Jones or Rodgers, maybe that person or persons should be listened to more moving forward. And whoever was saying, we're good with the unproven guy who got a knee injury that knocked him out for the whole year, let's go do this, maybe they should have a little less sway going forward. Speaking of going forward, Brian Flores, not under contract for next year. That surprised me. Something Devin McCourty mentioned recently, and I poked around a little bit. It's accurate. Brian Flores' contract expires after next week. Now, one person I spoke to said he'll be back. They'll do everything they can to bring him back. Well, okay, bring him back now. If you're ever going to bring him back now. Because once the coaching carousel starts to spin, once these coaching candidates begin to do their interviews, this is how the game goes. They want to go in there and say, here's who I'll deliver. And if there's an incoming coach who can deliver Brian Flores as defensive coordinator, that person's more likely to get the job. So you can't drag your feet with Flores if you're the Vikings. You can't do it. You got to get this done. Because once we get into the first week of the playoffs, once the permissions start going out to interview the various assistant coaches, once those interviews start happening, one of those candidates is going to show up and say, I can deliver Brian Flores. Oh, tell me more. Now, Brian Flores, in the opinion of many, should be a viable candidate to be a head coach. And I agree with that, especially after the performance we saw yesterday. Perfect time for him to have that. But you know what? Last year there was buzz. End of the day, nothing happened. And the problem for Flores, and look, this is the risk he took when nearly 4 years ago he decided to sue the NFL and multiple specific teams for racial discrimination. And then later the Texans got added to the party for retaliating against him, for not giving him a fair shake as they decided who they were going to hire as head coach, just, checking the box and playing along, but not being serious about considering Brian Flores because he had dared to sue Big Shield. Somebody asked me recently, what about Flores to the Giants? Well, he sued them. And this is where it gets weird. The average person, and I see this pushback all the time on Twitter. Now, I know Twitter's not a real place, and I know most of the people there, not most, half, most, I don't know. Most of the ones I interact with, there's a lot of vitriol. There's a very low appreciation of what the law requires. But the reaction is, well why would the Giants hire Flores? He sued them. Why would any employer hire someone who sued them? Well, because the law makes it clear you can't retaliate against people who have exercised their legal rights against you. That's not how the world works. Yeah, there may be an inclination to not want to do business with that person because that person dared to sue us, but it's not some frivolous case. Hell, Troy Vincent said either not long before or not long after the case was filed that they do have an issue when it comes to the representation of black coaches in the NFL. It's a long-standing issue. We all know about it. It was just a matter of time before somebody did something about it. And that case is still pending against the NFL, the Giants, the Dolphins, the Broncos, and the Texans. So, look, is it wrong for the Giants to consider the lawsuit when they're putting together their list of coaching candidates? Yes, it's wrong. And maybe they give him a perfunctory interview. Maybe they check the box. The reality is, when the supply of qualified candidates so far outweighs the demand, and I know the supply may be less this year than usual, but work with me on this. It's always easy to pivot away from someone you don't want. In the NFL head coaching profession, if there's someone you just don't want, John Gruden, Brian Flores, whoever, for whatever reason, right, wrong, or otherwise, there's always a way to stick handle toward the person you do want. And we see that more often than not. It's not about avoiding the one you don't want. It's about finding your way to the one you do want. There aren't so many obvious candidates out there that you can't get the one you want, but also there's so many people who want those jobs that it's easy to move around the ones you don't. If that makes any sense, I'm not quite sure it does. But my point is this: I don't think Brian Flores is going to be the head coach of the Giants. I'll be surprised, very surprised. And I'll wonder whether or not there's some sort of backroom dealing that, even though they can't require him to dismiss his lawsuit if he gets another head coaching job, they can't do that. But if they get an off-the-record wink nod, hey, we'd love to hire you, but we're paying lawyers to, that money we're spending on the lawyers could just go directly to you. If there was just a way, no suggestions, no requests. If there was just a way, they wouldn't have to deal with that lawsuit. And then they take the leap of faith, they hire him, and the lawsuit gets settled for some reasonable amount. I think you have to settle it for a reasonable amount. You can't just dismiss it. That would look too fishy, but that's a way to make it happen. I doubt it. Because, the multi-billionaires who are very used to getting what they want and not being questioned by anyone, they resent being sued. They resent it. It's us against them. That's football. It's us against them. And Brian Flores is one of them who has sued us. We don't like that. We don't want that. So I think he'll be a defensive coordinator next year for the Vikings or someone else. And I think with each passing minute that the Vikings don't give him a new contract, the chances of him leaving go up. I think that's it from Vikings Lions. I will say this, though. I got some of the Vikings fans triggered because something the Vikings posted on social media after the game pressed one of my buttons. The perfunctory tweet from a team that no one expected to win, rubbing it in the faces, not of the team they beat, but in the faces of the people who, as part of their job duties, they pick the outcomes of games. Hey, Vikings, there's no reason anyone should have thought you were going to win the game. Enjoy the fact that you won the game. You don't need to drag the NFL.com writers, all of whom said they thought the Lions would win. Their employer expected them to make a pick. How could anyone have reasonably expected to see the Vikings win that game with Max Brosmer as the starting quarterback and J.J. McCarthy out and the Lions playing for something and the Vikings playing for nothing? And these folks are just doing their jobs. They're not gratuitously injecting themselves into the conversation. It's part of what the NFL wants. They want to start the conversation. They want to have their people make picks. And then one of their teams turns around and drags the NFL.com writers who make their picks for getting it wrong. That always drives me nuts. Like, how dare you make an assessment of this game based upon how we've performed this year? We've been bad. We've been good kind of lately, but, beating lesser teams. These are the Lions playing for a playoff spot. Did anybody pick the Vikings? So that irks me when that happens. And I wasn't even part of it. They could have dragged me. Of course I picked the Lions. I grew up a Vikings fan. I got a bunch of, everything I got for Christmas has a Vikings logo on it somewhere this year, even in a bad year. It's too late. It's what drew me to the sport in 1973. I can't help it. But I'm realistic about it. I didn't expect them to win yesterday.
Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.